I was grabbing a coffee in Red Deer recently when I struck up a conversation with a guy who was practically radiating a sense of impending victory. He was leaning over the counter, animatedly explaining how Alberta was finally going to hit back against Ottawa. With Prime Minister Carney in office, he felt the raw deal had become unbearable. He kept using this phrase, economic liberation, as he showed me a series of clips on his phone. Convoys, flags, and maps where Alberta was colored the same shade of Republican red as the American heartland. He was giddy, convinced that joining forces with the Orange Main down south was the silver bullet. To him, it wasn't just politics. It was a long-awaited divorce from a family that didn't appreciate him. But then the atmosphere in that booth shifted instantly. Someone at the next table asked a simple logistical question. So what happens to your Canada pension when we're officially Puerto Rico North? The guy's face went from flushed with excitement to stone-cold silent. I watched him try to process the reality of being a stranded asset. Not just the oil, but the people. I brought up the fact that Washington is already securing Venezuelan heavy crude, the exact same stuff Alberta produces, and they aren't exactly looking to pay top dollar to a new leverage-free territory. I mentioned the northern wetback welcome he'd likely receive at the new border. The bravado didn't just fade, it curdled. He went from talking about sovereignty to swearing about how BC was obligated to let his oil through, seemingly forgetting that in his version of the future, BC is a foreign country that would tax him into the ground. It was a fascinating, almost jarring transformation to witness this leap from the high of political theater to the sudden, freezing realization that when you finally walk out the door actually locks behind you. For Canadians, once you're out, you're out. And as I looked at the confusion written on his face, I had to wonder, does the leadership pushing this charade actually understand the suicide mission they're embarking on, or are they just hoping no one asks about the bill until it's too late to pay?
Ouch. You have this peak of pure emotion, the thrill of it all. And then it just smashes right into this cold, gray wall of logistics, pensions, borders, things that are, incredibly boring, but also incredibly real.
That's the thing that really stuck with me. It wasn't just that his facts were maybe a little shaky on oil markets or the Canada pension plan. It was the emotional whiplash. Yeah. He went from looking like he'd just won the lottery to looking like he'd lost his house. And it all happened in 30 seconds. It made me realize that we keep talking about this all wrong.
What do you mean by we?
I mean, the media, the commentators, the Laurentian elites, as he would probably put it. We keep treating this Wexit movement, this Western separation idea, as if it's just a political disagreement.
Like it's a debate over carbon tax levels or something.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's a line item in a budget. But you don't get that look in a man's eyes over a tax rate. You just don't. You get that look when your entire reality is fracturing right in front of you.
So you're saying it's not political?
I think it's post-political or pre-political. It's something deeper.
Yep.
So for this deep dive, I really want to step back from the headlines. I don't want to talk about the latest polls or what some politicians said yesterday. I want to talk about the bedrock.
Okay.
We've got a stack of research here that suggests this isn't politics at all. It's sociology. And it's economics, but the psychology of economics. The brutal stuff.
I mean, if you try to analyze the breakup of a family just by looking at their text messages, you're going to miss the whole story. You have to look at the years of resentment, the financial stress, the feeling of being unheard. You're trying to explain a forest fire by looking at a single match, but you have to look at the drought. You have to look at all the dry tinder that's been piling up for decades.
Exactly. The dry tinder. So here's the roadmap for where we're going today. We're going to look at this whole thing through three really distinct lenses.
Okay.
First, we have to talk about the sociology. We need to really understand why that guy in Red Deer feels like a complete stranger in his own country. It's not just anger. There's a specific term for it. It's called anomie.
Right. From the French sociologist Émile Durkheim, it's this idea of normlessness, a collapse of the shared rules.
Then second, we're going to get into the weeds of the money. And I don't just mean who pays what, I mean the structural engineering of resentment itself. We have some papers here on the equalization formula that are, honestly, they're pretty shocking.
Incentive trap.
The incentive trap, yeah. We're going to look at how the system might actually be designed, maybe accidentally, maybe not, to incentivize failure and punish success, and how that creates what one of our sources calls a betrayal of merit.
It's a fascinating if, pretty depressing piece of economic theory when you see it in practice.
And finally, we're going to pull it all together and go to the dinner table. We're going to look at the psychology of identity. We'll explore how the woke politics you see in the big cities and the Wexit politics in the country are, well, how they're actually the same phenomenon.
Okay, that's a bold claim.
But the argument is that they're both just panic rooms. Panic rooms built by lonely people.
So these two groups that see themselves as mortal enemies are actually just twins looking in a mirror and hating what they see.
Yeah. And that one, I think that's going to be the hardest pill for a lot of people to swallow.
With the sociology.
Let's start with the sociology. And I want to take you back to that coffee shop vibe for a second.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't just anger in that guy's voice. It was this profound sense of dislocation, of being unmoored, lost. And I was thinking about the rise of these Canadian regional secession movements like Wexit, and it just hit me that we're looking at this through completely the wrong lens. We always talk politics, votes and parties, but we should be talking sociology. Specifically, Durkheimian anomy.
Right.
What I'm seeing is this perceived failure of national institutions, parliament, the courts, the whole system to uphold shared economic and cultural norms. And it's driving this very specific kind of political fragmentation. It's not just a disagreement anymore. It's a breakdown of the rules of the game.
It's interesting you use that exact phrase, breakdown of the rules, because that's almost a literal translation of anomy. It comes from the Greek animus, which means without law.
So anarchy.
Well, no. When we hear anarchy, we think of, people in the streets with Molotov cocktails, breaking windows. Durkheim didn't really mean that. He meant normlessness.
Okay, but help me get my head around that. Normlessness sounds really abstract. The guy in Red Deer seemed to have a lot of norms. He had very, very strong opinions on how things should be.
He has norms. His community has norms. But the broader society, the nation he's a part of, no longer reflects or validates them. In fact, it actively opposes them.
Oh.
So anomy is what Durkheim called a derangement of the will. It's the psychological state you enter when the social standards that reality is imposing on you no longer match your internal, personal, or group standards. Okay, imagine you're a football player. You've trained your entire life to tackle, to run, to score. You know the rules of football inside and out. You value those rules. They give your life meaning and structure.
Right.
Then suddenly, in the middle of the championship game, the referee blows the whistle and announces that from now on, tackling is a crime. And running with the ball is considered toxic masculinity.
I'd be completely lost. Everything I'm good at, everything I've built my entire identity on is not just useless. It's now officially wrong. It's immoral.
Exactly. Yeah. You don't just feel annoyed or that the call was unfair. You feel dislocated from reality itself. You feel like the entire world has gone mad. That is anomy.
Okay.
And the sources we're looking at, they connect this feeling directly to what they call the Western myth. And we should probably clarify for everyone, when sociologists use the word myth, they don't mean a lie or a falsehood.
Right. It's not like saying the Sasquatch is a myth.
No, a myth is a constitutive narrative. It's the story a people tells itself to explain who they are, where they came from, and where they're going. It's the software that runs the cultural hardware.
So what is the Western myth, according to this research?
It's built on a few key pillars. The first is obvious: geography, the sheer distance from the center of power in Ottawa and Toronto. The second is a sense of distinctiveness, the whole pioneering spirit, rugged individualism, that sort of ethos.
Cowboy hat and the pickup truck.
Yes, but the strongest pillar, the one that really holds the whole structure up, is this idea of shared pain. The core of the myth is that the West is and has always been an internal colony.
An internal colony. That is a really heavy term.
It's an explosive term. But you have to try and see it from that perspective. The belief is that the region exists primarily to be exploited by the Laurentian elites, the financial and political power centers in Montreal, Ottawa, and Toronto.
So the narrative is?
The narrative is, we dig the wealth out of the ground with our hands. You in the East take that wealth to build your subways and your museums, and then, to add insult to injury, you send us back regulations written by people who've never seen a farm, regulations that make it harder for us to dig.
It's the feeling of being a resource extraction zone rather than an equal partner in confederation.
And this is where the anomy really kicks into high gear. Durkheim talks about this shift in societies from organic solidarity to a state where the different parts no longer feel connected to the whole.
What's organic solidarity?
It's the natural interdependence of a complex society. In a healthy, functioning country, the shoemaker in the city knows he needs the farmer in the country for food, and the farmer knows he needs the shoemaker for boots. Their fates are intertwined. There's a mutual respect, even if they have different lives.
Nice.
In this case, the producer in Alberta, the oil worker, the farmer, looks at the federal government in Ottawa and doesn't see a partner. He sees a force that is actively hostile to his very existence.
Right. The guy in Red Deer, he values oil production. He doesn't just see it as a job for the money. He probably sees it as noble work, as fueling civilization, keeping the lights on.
Of course. But the national norm, the story being broadcast from Ottawa, the story reinforced by global bodies like the UN, is that his life's work is destroying the planet.
So his internal compass is screaming, North is good, North is productive. But the official national map says, North is illegal, North is evil.
And that creates a psychic break. It's pure anomie. The producer, in Durkheim's terms, can no longer see the limits of the market or their proper place in the whole social organism. They just feel subject to these limitless abstract forces, global carbon markets, federal climate policies, that are totally unmoored from their lived reality.
This helps explain a really important shift I've noticed over the years. I mean, historically, Western alienation wasn't about leaving. Think back to the Reform Party in the 1990s with Preston Manning.
Right. Their slogan, their whole reason for being was, "The West wants in."
The West wants in. It was a cry for inclusion. They wanted Senate reform to balance regional power. They wanted a Tripoli Senate elected, effective, and equal. They wanted a seat at the big table so they could help fix the rules of the game.
They wanted to reform the system from within. They still believed in the system.
But that is absolutely not what I heard in that coffee shop. The guy wasn't talking about Senate reform. He was talking about divorce, full stop.
And that is the critical evolution that our source material highlights. The abject failure of those federal institutions to actually change. The fact that the Senate is still unelected, that the power balance hasn't budged an inch despite decades of advocacy, that failure has curdled the desire for inclusion into a burning desire for rejection.
It's like you've been banging on a locked door for 30 years asking to be let in. At some point, you stop knocking and you start looking for a can of gasoline.
Or at the very least, you decide to walk away and build your own house. There's this document we have, the Whistle-Stop source, which is this very raw, unvarnished text from within the separatist movement. It describes Confederation today as managed decline.
Managed decline.
Yes. It frames the relationship not as a partnership anymore, but as economic servitude.
Servitude. That's a master-slave dynamic. That's not a partnership that's gone sour.
It's a total reframing. And once you start viewing the relationship that way, reform is no longer a logical option. You don't negotiate for better terms of servitude. You escape.
So the hope is gone.
The hope for internal reform is gone. And that's why the mood has shifted so dramatically from let's fix Ottawa to let's leave Ottawa. The anomie has become total. The norms of the West and the norms of central Canada are now seen as fundamentally, irreversibly irreconcilable.
Which, I guess, brings us directly to the engine of that perceived servitude. Because feelings of alienation are one thing, but money is a whole other level of real. And usually when people start using words like servitude, they're looking at their bank accounts.
And this is where we have to wade into the very murky, very emotional waters of federal equalization payments.
You know, I was scrolling through a series of long-form posts from a young professional in Calgary, a high achiever, an engineer who moved from the East to build a life in what she called a productive province. And she wrote about this feeling of the betrayal of merit.
The betrayal of merit. Powerful.
To her, this fiscal equalization system isn't just a line item in a federal budget, it's a psychological weight. A constant presence. She described the feeling of watching her local infrastructure, roads and hospitals, crumble, and seeing her neighbors lose their homes during downturns, all while knowing that billions of dollars are being transferred to regions that she perceives as being openly hostile to the very industries that generated those funds in the first place.
The pipeline politics.
Exactly. And she says there's this specific kind of bitterness that grows when you feel your social responsibility is being exploited rather than appreciated. Yeah. She described it as a forced marriage where one partner works 2 jobs to pay the bills and the other partner spends all the savings while constantly complaining about the noise the worker makes.
Wow. Analogy. The partner working 2 jobs while the other complains about the noise. It really captures the visceral, emotional core of the anger.
It's a very cynical perspective, perhaps, but it highlights what she sees as a total collapse of the trust you need to maintain a federal family. It's a sharp, stinging viewpoint. And, while I can understand that frustration, that feeling of your hard work being siphoned off, I can't help but worry that viewing an entire country through a purely transactional lens misses the for better or worse part of the deal. It misses the heart of what makes a nation stay together through tough times.
Agree, but we need to look at the mechanics here. because there's so much mythology and misinformation about how equalization actually works. The reality is actually more complex and, you could argue, more damaging than the slogans on the bumper stickers suggest.
There, let's bust the biggest myth first. The government of Alberta does not literally write a giant check to the government of Quebec every year, right?
Correct. That's the most common misconception, and it's just not how it works. It's not a direct transfer between provinces. It's simpler and also more complicated than that. You, me, the guy in Red Deer, a barista in Montreal, we all pay our federal taxes, income tax, the GST, all of it. That money goes to Ottawa and gets dumped into one giant pot. It's called the Consolidated Revenue Fund.
Okay, so one big national pot of money. Everyone pays in based on how much they earn or spend.
Right. Then the federal government does a calculation. They look at the fiscal capacity of each individual province. They ask a hypothetical question. If this province applied the national average tax rates to its economy, how much money could it raise on its own?
Could, being the really important word there.
It's the whole ballgame. It's a measure of the raw potential of a province's economy. So if a province's calculated capacity is below the national standard, Ottawa reaches into that big pot of our tax dollars and gives them a top-up payment to bring them up to the average. That top-up is the equalization payment.
So because a province like Alberta has high average incomes and a huge oil and gas sector, its fiscal capacity is massive, so it gets $0 from the pot. But because a province like Quebec has lower average incomes and a different economic structure, its calculated capacity is lower, so it gets a massive check from that pot every year.
Precisely. And of course, since Albertans on average earn more, they paid more into that pot in the first place. That's where the net transfer comes from. But here, right here, is where we get to the really explosive part. It's what the economist Urjit Ferretti calls the incentive trap.
This is the part that seems to defy all logic.
It's a mechanism that is frankly disturbing if you believe in the principles of economic growth and self-sufficiency. It's sometimes called the flypaper effect.
Okay, let's do the thought experiment.
Right. Imagine you are the premier of a hypothetical province. We'll call it province hustle. You're a have-not province, but you want to change that. You want to grow your economy, so you do all the textbook things. You cut taxes, you slash regulations, you do everything you can to encourage business investment.
My economy booms, everyone starts making more money, new companies move in. Great. I get reelected in a landslide.
Maybe. But look at what happens to your equalization payment. Because your economy is now booming, your fiscal capacity skyrockets. On paper, to Ottawa, you suddenly look rich. So Ottawa's formula says, congratulations, you don't need our help anymore, and they cut off your transfer payments. You could lose billions of dollars in free federal money overnight.
Okay, that would definitely sting. But at least I have a booming economy to show for it.
True. But now, let's look at your neighbor. Imagine you're the premier of Province Chill. You also receive equalization, and you rely on it heavily to fund your public services. Decide, what? I want an even bigger public sector. I'm going to raise taxes significantly on corporations and high-income earners to pay for it.
Okay, so I raise taxes.
Well, what does basic economics tell us? Happens when you raise taxes significantly. Economic activity tends to slow down. A few businesses might leave. People might work slightly less or shelter their income. Your overall tax base shrinks a little bit.
That sounds bad for me. My government is losing revenue.
But are you? Because your tax base just shrank. Your fiscal capacity just dropped. In the eyes of Ottawa's formula, you now look poorer. So the equalization formula kicks in and automatically sends you more money to make up for your lower capacity.
Okay, so if I intentionally or unintentionally damage my own economy, Ottawa writes me a bigger check to cover the damage I just did.
That is the incentive trap. The system effectively subsidizes economic inefficiency. Fareed's research found that for every single dollar increase in equalization grants, the recipient provinces tend to increase their own government spending by about 64 cents.
It's like free money.
It functions like free money. If you are a premier of a recipient province, you have a powerful financial disincentive to actually fix your underlying economy. Because if you fix it, you lose the free money from Ottawa.
It's like you're paying people to stay sick so you can keep sending them medicine. It's literally rewarding provinces for having lower economic potential.
That's the core of the argument from the West. And this is why the guy in Red Deer feels like the entire game is rigged against him. It's not just that he's paying more into the pot, it's the feeling that the system is designed to keep the other provinces dependent on his productivity forever. There is no graduation day built into the system.
And this is where that betrayal of merit idea comes roaring back. Because it's one thing to help out a neighbor who falls on hard times, a flood or a recession. That's what a country does. But it's a completely different thing to feel like you're supporting a neighbor who refuses to get a job because you're paying all his bills.
And the resentment gets even sharper, even more personal when you add the natural resource dimension to it. The whistle-stop source points out this glaring, almost insulting contradiction. The wealth that fills that big federal pod, the wealth that makes the whole equalization system possible, comes disproportionately from the resource sector, oil and gas.
Right. But the provinces receiving the lion's share of that money, Quebec, has received over $100 billion since 2007, according to the numbers in our source, are often the most vocal and powerful opponents of that very sector.
They legally ban the pipelines. They use the courts to block the export terminals. They pass resolutions condemning the oil sands.
So the message being sent to Alberta is crystal clear. We will gladly take the billions of dollars your oil generates, but we will use our political power to legally block you from producing and selling more of it.
It's a mind-bending contradiction.
It's fiscal gaslighting. It's like saying, I hate what you do for a living, it's immoral and dirty, but please hand over your paycheck.
And this leads to what might be the most psychologically damaging argument of all. It's what the source calls the Norwegian counterfactual. This one is particularly painful for a lot of Westerners to even think about.
Oh man, this one hurts. I read this section of the research and I physically winced.
The comparison is brutally simple. Alberta and Norway, both are northern, developed regions, both have massive oil and gas reserves. Both hit the energy jackpot around the same time, back in the 70s.
Right. And Norway, as an independent nation, made a choice. They established a sovereign wealth fund. They decided to bank the surplus from the good years for the future.
And today, that fund, it's almost hard to comprehend the number. It's worth over $1.5 trillion US dollars. A trillion, with a T.
It effectively makes every single citizen of Norway a millionaire on paper. It secures their pensions, their health care, their social safety net for the next century, no matter what happens to the price of oil.
It's the ultimate national insurance policy.
And Alberta.
Alberta has the Heritage Savings Trust Fund, which is, well, let's just say it's considerably smaller, a tiny fraction of Norway's.
Because the surplus money didn't stay in Alberta to be saved.
The argument in the source is that the trillions of dollars in surplus wealth that could have built a Norwegian-style safety net for Albertans was instead siphoned off to Ottawa. It was used to pay for social programs in the East and, politically, to buy peace in the Federation.
So when the guy in Red Deer is looking at his phone, scrolling through those maps of an independent Alberta, he's not just seeing some political fantasy. He's seeing a lost timeline.
Yes.
He's seeing the ghost of the $1 trillion that he believes should be sitting in a bank account in Edmonton, securing his pension, securing his kid's future, guaranteeing a high quality of life forever.
Exactly. It creates this profound psychological sense of a lost future. And when an entire population starts to feel like they have been systemically robbed of their own future, they stop identifying with the nation that they believe robbed them. They start looking for a new tribe.
Which brings us to what might be the most surprising and maybe the most important part of this whole deep dive, because usually when we talk about a Wexit supporter and say a woke social justice activist, we talk about them as mortal enemies.
Right. The two opposite poles of the culture war, the truck convoy versus the university campus.
But our sources today suggest something completely different. Frankly, it kind of blew my mind when I first connected the dots.
That they're actually the same thing.
That they are reacting to the same underlying problem. Try to imagine a dinner table in a suburb of Edmonton. At that table, you have a father and his university-aged daughter, and they represent the two warring poles of the modern Canadian psyche. I saw this documentary snippet featuring a dynamic exactly like this, and it was jarring.
Okay.
The daughter, she lives in a downtown urban core. She's deeply immersed in the woke identity politics of what our source calls the therapeutic state. She's seeking a sense of justice and safety through new, curated social norms.
Right.
The father, meanwhile, has doubled down on Wexit populism. It's a kind of defensive crouch to protect a traditional authority, a way of life that he feels is being constantly mocked and dismantled.
They're speaking completely different languages.
The argument here is that they are both reacting to the exact same thing, the atomization of modern life. They both, deep down, feel lonely, disconnected, and unprotected by the old institutions that used to give life meaning.
So they've each built a fortress of identity politics to hide inside.
Exactly. They speak the same language of grievance, just in different dialects. They are both desperately looking for a tribe to belong to because the nation of Canada has become too thin, too abstract to hold them anymore.
That's actually heartbreaking when you put it that way.
It is heartbreaking, seeing both the far-left urban movements and the populist regional movements as symptoms of the exact same loneliness. It makes all the political anger feel much more like a collective cry for help. We are so busy building these defensive structures that we've completely forgotten how to build a shared home.
So let's break down this idea of atomization. We have this thesis by Ezekiel Lasik that makes a really provocative connection. It links the principle of one man, one vote to this modern loneliness. Now that's going to sound strange because we're all taught that one man, one vote is the pinnacle of democracy. It's the good guy winning the story of history.
It's the foundation of freedom, right?
Politically, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
But sociologically, Lasik argues it came with a huge hidden cost. Because historically, you weren't just an individual floating in space. You were embedded in what sociologists call intermediate institutions.
Like shock absorbers for your life.
They were the shock absorbers between you, the tiny individual, and the massive, cold, impersonal machinery of the state.
So you're talking about the family, the local church.
The family, the church or synagogue or mosque, the trade guild, the township council, the union local. These were the buffers. If you fell on hard times, it wasn't the government agency you went to first. It was the church benevolent fund. If you had a grievance with your employer, the union fought for you. Your identity wasn't just, I am a Canadian. It was, I am a father, a deacon, a steel worker from Hamilton.
But over the last century, as we put more and more emphasis on individual rights, on legal individualism, we systematically stripped power away from all those groups. We said, no, the only two things that matter are the individual citizen and the federal state.
We took the shock absorbers off the car. So now, when the car of society hits a pothole, a big recession, a global pandemic, a rapid cultural shift, the driver feels the full impact directly in their spine. There's no buffer. It's just you, alone, facing a government that represents 40 million other people.
It's designed to make you feel small and powerless.
It does make you feel powerless. And this is where the philosopher Philip Rieff comes in. He wrote about the collapse of the sacred order. He argued that every healthy culture needs a why, a shared metaphysics, a transcendent story about who we are and what our purpose is.
A reason for it all.
A reason for it all. And when that collapses, and what Nietzsche called the death of God, or just the loss of a shared story, we descend into what Rieff called a third world culture.
And again, he wasn't talking about geography. He didn't mean developing nations.
He meant a culture of the psychological man. A culture where, without a higher purpose to serve, the only goal left for human life is therapeutic well-being. The purpose of life becomes simply to feel good, to be validated, to manage one's anxieties.
Okay, so let's connect that back to the daughter at the dinner table.
The daughter is the perfect child of this third world culture. She has no sacred order. The church is irrelevant to her. The nation is problematic. So she turns to the state to fill that God-sized hole in her life. She demands what we're calling a therapeutic state.
She wants the government to do more than just build roads and run armies. She wants it to validate her personal identity, to police language, to create safe spaces, and make her feel emotionally secure.
Yes. Her identity politics, her wokeness, is a desperate attempt to build a new tribe, a new moral order, in a world that feels empty and meaningless. She is demanding that the state act as her parent, her protector, and her priest, all rolled into one.
And the father, the guy in the fuck Trudeau hat.
He is feeling the exact same emptiness, the same atomization, but he experiences it as a loss. He remembers the shock absorbers, or at least he remembers the stories of them. He remembers the time when the family and the local community had real power and authority, and he looks at the therapeutic state, the very state his daughter is demanding, and he sees it as the monster that ate his world.
So he builds his own fortress, and he calls it Wexit.
Exactly. Populism in this reading is a defensive crouch. He is trying to protect the last remnants of his traditional authority and community. He hears terms like the Great Reset or the globalist agenda, and he sees them as this vast impersonal force that wants to atomize him even further, to dissolve his identity and turn him from a citizen of a place into just a generic consumer unit in a global marketplace.
The producer can no longer see the limits of the market. It all comes back to that Durkheim quote, doesn't it? The global economy is too big to comprehend. The federal government is too distant and hostile. So he wants to draw a smaller circle. He wants to put a border around Alberta and say, inside this line, the old rules still apply. Inside this line, I matter. Inside this line, I am not alone.
But the tragedy, and this is the heartbreaking part you mentioned earlier, is that neither of them can really win this way. The daughter thinks if she just cancels enough people and gets the right rules passed, she'll finally feel safe. The father thinks if he just draws a new border on a map, he'll finally feel at home again.
But neither of those things actually rebuilds the community. Neither of them puts the shock absorbers back on the car.
They're just fighting each other over the steering wheel of a car that is already headed off a cliff.
And that brings us back to the cliff itself. Because while we can sit here and empathize with the psychology of the father, we can understand the anomie and the economic grievance that makes him want to leave, we have to look at the cold, hard reality of the jump.
The locked door.
The locked door.
Let's go back to that man in Red Deer. To that exact moment, his face changed. You mentioned the northern wetback comment. It was a cruel thing to say, maybe, but it was the necessary splash of cold water.
It was, because the fantasy of Wexit, the beautiful dream, is that Alberta peacefully leaves Canada and becomes a rich, independent Texas of the North, a new Norway.
But the main source text we're drawing on here for the counter-argument, it calls this a suicide mission, a complete fantasy.
So let's play out the Puerto Rico North scenario. Let's say the referendum passes, Alberta separates. Monday morning, 9 a.m., what actually happens?
Well, first and most importantly, you wake up as a landlocked country. You have zero coastline. Zero. Now, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea guarantees a landlocked nation access to the ocean. But it absolutely does not guarantee you a right to build a pipeline across a foreign country.
So the oil is stranded.
It's even more stranded than it is now. Right now, as a province, Alberta is protected by the Constitution, which has provisions for free trade within Canada. Once you leave, all of those are gone. British Columbia, which is now a foreign and likely very hostile country that you just acrimoniously divorced, can tax your oil transport into the ground. The United States can impose any tariff it wants. You have zero leverage.
And what about the money?
You lose the Canadian dollar. So do you create a new Alberta buck? What's it pegged to? What's it actually worth on global markets? The source argues that the remaining Canada would have absolutely zero incentive to be helpful. It says, and this is a quote, "We Canadians should commit to provide them with absolutely nothing. No use of the Canadian dollar, no ability to ship across international borders."
It's the Hotel California problem. You can check out anytime you like, but if you leave with nothing. You leave naked. You become, as the guy at the next table said, a stranded asset.
And that is the terrifying irony of anomy. The pain of normlessness is so profound that it drives people to consider drastic, radical action to fix it. The logic is, I need to leave this house to save my way of life. But the action itself, secession, would very likely destroy the entire material basis of that way of life.
You leave to save your pension, and in the act of leaving, you destroy the currency your pension was supposed to be paid in.
Exactly. Which brings us back full circle to the question you asked at the very beginning. Does the political leadership pushing this actually understand this reality?
They're not stupid people. I think they have to know. But maybe they're just riding the tiger. Maybe the anger is so useful, the grievance is so powerful for fundraising and for getting votes, that they just keep feeding the beast, hoping they never actually have to open the cage door.
But the beast is getting very hungry. And the guy in that coffee shop in Red Deer, he's standing there with his hand on the latch, ready to open the cage.
So where does this leave us? We've looked at the sociology of the broken rules, we've looked at the economics of the incentive trap, and we've looked at the psychology of the lonely fortress.
It leaves us with a choice, I think, in how we see the world. We tend to look at political polarization as a simple battle between good and evil. If you're the daughter at that dinner table, your father is a backwards fascist. If you're the father, your daughter is a brainwashed communist.
But if we look at it through the lens we've used in this deep dive,
we just see two groups of very lonely people. They are standing in the ruins of a shared home, the sacred order that used to bind us together, the organic solidarity that used to make us feel like we needed each other. And because the home is in ruins, they're each trying to build a tiny windowless fortress out of the rubble.
One fortress is built of woke identity politics. The other is built of Wexit regional nationalism. But they're both just defensive structures. They're both just panic rooms.
And you can't live a full life in a panic room. Not for long.
So the real question isn't who wins the fight. The question isn't whether Alberto leaves or stays. The real underlying question is whether anyone at all, still remembers how to build a home that's big enough for everyone, a home that doesn't require a fortress.
And that is a much, much harder task than just winning an election or a referendum. That requires rebuilding all those intermediate institutions, rebuilding trust, fixing the broken economic formulas so the game feels fair again.
It's a generational project, at least. But the alternative? The alternative is that guy in Red Deer standing in a coffee shop with the sudden freezing realization that the door has locked behind him and he's stuck on the outside in the cold forever.
Nobody wants that ending to the story.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. It's heavy stuff for sure, but trying to understand the root causes, the sociology, the economics, the psychology is, I think, the only way to make any sense of the noise.
Absolutely.
We'll catch you on the next one. Take care of each other out there.